Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. This is Laurie Smith on Blog Talk Radio, and it is 7 o'clock here in the morning. Calgary, Alberta. It is Saturday, and May 8th. I'm so happy to be here. I just woke up, and I'm having some coffee, and my voice is a little bit, it's just hasn't gotten going yet, but we'll do our best here. And we're on for half an hour. This is a live internet streaming radio broadcast from blogtalkradio.com. And this is child abuse prevention and human rights abuse prevention is up to us. And we're going to continue on with domestic violence and the effects it has on children. I found another great article, and I had done a domestic violence. I did about 3 weeks, a 3-week period of shows back in January, earlier this year, on domestic violence, and I found a whole bunch of great articles. But I'm just kind of going over it again because it's kind of difficult for people to go back through the archives. Because there's I don't know how many show pages, but there's almost 200 shows, or there's over 200 shows now. It's kind of hard to go back and find those shows. So that's why I thought, well, I'll just go over this again because it's so important, that we, understand what happens in families where there's a lot of domestic violence, what happens to the children, the effects it has on the children, and even if the child's not being abused, just growing up in that home with a lot of domestic violence and abuse, it does affect them and will have a direct effect on their life and their own, emotional well-being and behavioral ways of behaving, right? So it's just so important that we take a look at this. And I know so many people suffering out there in domestic violence situations and personally right now. And so really the best thing we can do is just support them and try to do all we can to just be a shoulder and to also to be a support system for that person. Try to help them to get a safety plan. If they are still in a home that is full of domestic violence, they're an adult. Really, they have to make the decision to save their own life. So you can't put pressure on them to do things because they're already under enough stress, right? And so that won't help them at all. There's all kinds of interesting information out there on how to help people who are in a domestic violence situation, and what to say and what not to say, and how to be there to just support them and try to help them get through it. And I think the best thing we can do is to let them know that if we truly are there and we really want to make to be that support person for them and to be there, their help in a time of need, that we just let them know that we are doing that, we're there for them, and that they can call us anytime, day or night, if they need a hand or if they need something, if they need us to phone the police or whatever, and set up a safety plan with that person. And that way, if worse comes to worst case scenario, their lives are in danger, they can phone you and you can start the ball rolling, getting the calling 911, and also getting ready to help them right when they leave the home. So it's so important to be a support system to people out there. There's so many people suffering and so many people in serious situations all around the world, not just in North America. And so yeah, we just have to really think about these people. These are our neighbors. These are our family members. These are people at work that we know, people that we see in the stores. These are people that we would interact with in our daily lives. Going through domestic violence and abuse. It does happen. It happens more than we know. Most of it's not reported, and it's just horrible and very, very hard on people. And the sad point is that a lot of these people end up losing their lives at the hands of their partner, whether it's the husband or the wife, the boyfriend or girlfriend, out of the rage and lack of control of that person and the mental instability of that person. They take the other person's life, and that's just it's horrible. And when I see these reports in the paper, it's so upsetting because you think, how could that have happened, and how could that have gotten so far to the point where somebody takes their partner's life? And this is supposed to be someone who loves them and cares about them, right? Like in a relationship, in a your husband or your wife, and boyfriend, girlfriend, and your partner really should be there for you, to protect you and care for you, not to kill you. So that's the problem. It's very heartbreaking, and I just hope that if anybody's listening to this that is in a domestic violence situation, that you will make sure you get yourself some help, because it's so important. And so yeah, we're going to continue on with that. I'm not a counselor or a therapist. I don't hold any counseling certificates or anything like that. I'm just a person who does my own blog talk shows, and you have to listen at your own discretion. I cover everything regarding abuse, and every topic, every situation, every issue surrounding abuse, whether it's domestic violence, sexual assault, all types of child abuse. And abuse is a scary topic. A lot of people feel a little bit uncomfortable with it, if not a lot uncomfortable with it. So you want to make sure that you are okay to listen to this show, and that it's not going to make you uncomfortable, because you ultimately have to be responsible for what you listen to. And so I always let people know ahead of time that what the topic is, and then you know yourself if you want to listen to it. If it makes you uncomfortable, please turn the show off. You won't be hurting my feelings at all. And if you're a young person, I'm fighting for child rights. I stand up for children. You got to get somebody to listen to this show with you. There's a lot of adult content on here, and the players could be just anywhere now. So if you're a young person under the age of 18, I would ask and just hope that you would have someone listen to this with you, and keep yourself safe online. Actually, tomorrow morning I'm going to do a segment on my show. Tomorrow morning is going to be on online safety again for children, because it's so important to know how to keep yourself safe online. There are millions, literally millions, of child sexual predators trying to get a hold of children. And they are looking for you if you're a young person under the age of 18, especially really young. It's not a good idea to live in fear, because fear is not a good way to live. But we need to be educated and aware that this stuff is going on. How to protect yourself is so important. You have to know how to protect yourself online and out in the real world. You know what I mean? And there's ways to do it, and you can feel a lot better if you have that education and you know how to keep yourself safe. And so you want to make sure you do that, because this is not a joke. We see reports in the paper all the time, kids losing their lives to child sexual predators. And if they're not killed, then they have to live with the consequences of the assault from this child sexual predator. And it will change your life. It will take away your life. And you will have to work extremely hard to regain what you have lost. And so you do not want to do that, right? You want to keep yourself safe. So that's why I ask young people under the age of 18 to make sure you have an adult listen to this show with you, to make sure it's something you should be listening to. And that's just, I think that's just smart, And so yeah, we're going to get right on with the material here. Last night we were looking at the effects of domestic violence on children from the ECE, the Early Childhood Educators Handbook, and we pretty much finished up that article last night. And we're going to now look at the dynamics of domestic violence on children, and this is from the NDA. I'm sorry, it's ACADV. So it's the what do those stand for now? See, I used to know this stuff because I was reading it quite a bit. Something Alabama Coalition Against Domestic Violence. I'm pretty sure. I'm thinking it is the Alabama Coalition Against Domestic Violence.org. So the actual website is http://www.acadv.org. And you can pull this article up and check it out. It says here is dynamics of domestic violence are unhealthy for children. And they go on to talk about the emotional, behavioral, social, physical, those all of those different areas will be affected if a child grows up in a home full of domestic violence, right? And then it says for parents, giving children love and care. And this is just a little bit of information for parents. And a child's own safety plan. They have a little child's safety plan here. Working with children. And there's statistics and whatnot. And of course, these statistics are old because this report was pretty much done in 1996, I think. Just looking at the actual information on this website. But the thing is the information's still the same as far as how it affects children and whatnot. They've done enough studies to know just how damaging it is and how completely horrible it is for a child to grow up in a home where their parents are fighting. There's a lot of abuse, a lot of pressure and stress. It's hard for children to cope. They normally have a hard time at school. They have a hard time at making friends because their situation is different than a lot of their peers, and they have a lot of stress in their life. It's very stressful to grow up in a home full of domestic violence, and like I know firsthand, I'm a secondhand victim of domestic violence, and thank God not a first-hand victim. I've never had a partner abuse me like that, but thank God. But the thing is I grew up with parents who were very abusive, and it's very hard on kids, and it will affect their lives. So that's why it's so important to get some information if you are a parent or caregiver and you have a lot of domestic violence going on in your home and there are children in the home. You want to know, just exactly what it will do to them being exposed to that violence all the time, right? So that's what this article is about. And so we'll just get right into it. It says, children react to their environment in different ways, and reactions can vary depending on the child's gender and age. Children exposed to family violence are more likely to develop social, emotional, psychological, and/or behavioral problems than those who are not. Recent research indicates that children who witness domestic violence show more anxiety, low self-esteem, depression, anger, and temperament problems than children who do not witness violence in the home. The trauma they experience can show up in emotional, behavioral, social, and physical disturbances that affect their development and can continue into adulthood, they said here. So that's just it. They've done enough studies to realize that, children who do not grow up in a domestic violence situation, their home life is pretty stable. Everybody seems to be doing quite well and behaving normally. They don't have a lot of those same problems that these kids have growing up in these homes. I knew so many kids growing up who grew up in homes that were full of domestic violence, and we were basically on the street all the time as young teenagers. And we used to hang around, and of course, because we lived in abusive homes, there wasn't a whole lot of supervision, and there wasn't a whole lot of, we already knew that we were going to be in trouble because most of us were abused in our homes anyway. So we didn't really care what the outcome and the aftermath would be if we were out doing stuff that we weren't supposed to be doing. But we all used to kind of pal around together, me and a whole bunch of people that I knew who were growing up in these horrible homes. And, we were there for each other for support because we knew we were very much all alike. And, we did a whole lot of drugs, and we could have gotten into some serious trouble many times. I'm very thankful that it didn't escalate to that for myself. A lot of my friends are dead now due to that fact, and they grew up in these horrible homes full of domestic violence and abuse towards themselves as well. And it's just horrible what it does to people. Most of my friends were abused as children, and abused children recognize each other, right? So you tend to know who's been in that situation before, especially when you're young. You sort of have I don't know if it's a sixth sense or something, but a lot of my friends living in the same within 2-block radius of myself were abused as well. It was just a very rampant time for people to be not treating their children well. I don't know why, but this was in the 70s and the early 80s, and it just seemed like there was so many of us, And one of my friends was shot and killed in his driveway due to a drug deal gone bad. Another one of my friends was just such a heavy-duty drug user. He was just so he was literally near death so many times, from this drug use. I don't even know if he's alive today. And so some other friends of mine, some girls that I knew, their lives were completely ruined because of drug use, and their lives were completely ruined when they were born because they were born into abusive homes like myself. And it's so hard to see what it does to people. I'm out of touch with most of those people. I don't even know where they are or how to find them. And I got out at the age of 21. I got the decision to make a better life for myself, and because it didn't start out so good. And I thought, man, I want to have a good life. I don't want to end my life in this horrible manner. So at the age of 21, I stopped doing drugs and stopped hanging around on the streets and decided to do something with myself, you know what I mean? But these other people didn't have an easy time with that and actually couldn't do that, so they continued on in their own violent lives as young adults. And that's why we see a lot of violence out there with youth and a lot of youth crime and stuff. You can imagine many of those kids have really horrible homes, and they really don't have anywhere else to go, and so they hang around with gang members, and they do crazy things that they normally wouldn't do if they were growing up in a stable home. So that's the whole issue behind this whole thing. Domestic violence definitely affects children. It will affect them, and if they don't go on to be very aggressive and doing crazy things and hurting themselves and getting involved in violent, aggressive behavior outside the home, they'll withdraw within themselves, and then they become antisocial, and there's so many problems. So we're going to look at that. Emotional effects from domestic violence on children. It says grief for family and personal losses, shame, guilt, and self-blame, confusion about conflicting feelings toward the parents, fear of abandonment or expressing emotions, the unknown or personal injury, anger, depression and feelings of helplessness and powerlessness, and embarrassment. And that's the emotional part of that, and that I experienced all of that. Not fear of abandonment, because my parents, I didn't think they would abandon us. I was actually afraid of being thrown out of the home, because nobody else, like my mother used to threaten to throw me out, especially when I was a young teenager, around between the ages of like 11 and 14, 15. And she never threatened to throw any of the other siblings out. It was just me. So I really felt personally unhappy with that, because I thought, okay, she's not willing to throw out my brothers who do drugs and bring big bags of drugs in the home, and drug users and drug dealers would come to our house and like threaten to blow the windows out with guns, and like bust down the door to get at my brothers, because my brothers were always stealing their drugs and stuff. And that's the dangerous environment that I grew up in, and my parents, of course, wouldn't do anything about it. And but they didn't threaten to throw out my brothers, who did a lot of jail time, had a lot of problems with violence and whatnot because of the way they grew up. And not once did my parents say, "Oh, we're just going to throw you out," right? But my mom wanted to throw me out, and so she didn't care if I came home. She didn't care. She wanted me out of the house, right? And I was a good kid. I really tried really hard to do well in school, and I didn't ditch school. I tried to behave myself at school. I did have some problems kind of bullying people around, but that's just because I was being bullied on a daily basis, and was just showing some of that aggression back outward so that nobody else would hurt me on the outside, as I was already being hurt on the in my home. And so it was my way of protecting myself, was to be the one to push other people around outside the home, and that way I could make sure I wasn't hurt outside the home. It was a protective measure, and it's horrible. It's what happens to a lot of kids. And, just the depression and the feelings of helplessness, right? Embarrassment, there was a little bit of embarrassment there. There was, knowing that people know that your parents are fighting all the time. And there were people on the street that I lived on that did know that this was going on in the home, but they still loved my parents very much. And they never really thought about what it was doing to the kids, and they never even considered it to be a problem for the kids, and they never looked for any signs of abuse or anything like that, right? So that's why, that's so wrong. People need to pay attention to this stuff, right? If two people are fighting in the home all the time, you can guarantee the kids are in on it. They're going to suffer the consequences of those adults behaving the way that they do to each other. At some point, it's going to spill over to the children, whether it's emotionally, physically, you know what I mean? So it's horrible, and there's a whole shame and guilt and self-blame, confusing and conflicting feelings towards parents. I think that's one that I can totally relate with, because I wanted to hate my parents because of what they were doing to each other, what they were doing to us, and I wanted to, I felt like I hated them, and I used to tell them I hated them, right? Because they told me they hated me, and I was being beaten anyway, so I didn't care. I would just tell them to their face that I hated them, right? And actually, I was just hurting so bad, and I didn't hate them at all, and I loved them very much, but I hated to see what they were doing to each other, especially to my mom, because my mom was already so down and so not doing so well. You know what I mean? Like emotionally and psychologically and physically. She was very sick in all areas of her life. And I hated to see what was happening. And of course, she was my main abuser, because she would take her anger and depression and all of her hate that was in her heart out on me, right? So it just passed on down, through the family. And that's, I of course I love my parents, but I hated them too. So that's the conflicting feelings. You of course, you want your parents to love you and care about you, and so many times they don't. And people would say, "Oh, sure, your mom loved you," and I'd say, "Well, no, I really don't think she did. She probably did in her heart, but she didn't know how to show it." And she later on, before she passed away, she actually was saying stuff like, I do love all my children. But when I was 30, just before I moved up here, she told me that we were not wanted, and that she didn't love us, and that she did, we didn't mean anything to her. This is the kind of stuff she would do. She would do this horrible emotional, psychological abuse. She was still continuing that even up until the day pretty much before she died. So that's just the whole issue. It does affect children. It doesn't matter how old that child is. They could be 30. it will mess with their heads, and it's so bad. And you have to make sure that you do not do that to your children. And then there's behavioral consequences to domestic violence, right? Children growing up in domestic violence, acting out or withdrawing. This is the behavioral stuff. Aggressive or passive. They can either be really aggressive and pushing other kids around at school, or in their own neighborhoods, or they could be really passive and withdraw within themselves, right? Refusing to go to school, that's another problem because they're worried about the other parent and they don't want to leave the home because they're afraid what will happen if they do go. They won't be able to be there to help, There's caretaking, acting as a parent substitute. That can happen. I know I tried to do that for my mother because I was always taking my mom's side because it was better to take my mom's side because she was the one that was my main abuser. So if I took her side, I figured, hey, if I take my mom's side, then of course she's going to treat me better. But she never did. But I kept trying, and plus it was out of my heart because I wanted to help her. So many of us kids wanted to help her, and we all tried, Lying to avoid confrontation, rigid defenses. This is other behavioral consequences, the things that children will and young people will pick up as far as behaviors go, living in a domestic violence situation. Rigid defenses, excessive attention seeking, bedwetting and nightmares, out of control behavior, reduced intellectual competency, right? Because they can't even think about, they can't even develop intellectually properly because they're just steady being bombarded with abusive behavior in the home, and of course it does affect them. They don't have time to study because their parents are fighting. They're not sure if it's going to escalate to them. They're not sure if one of their parents will be killed in the violence and the abuse, And even if it's emotional abuse and it's not so much physical, it's that whole beating down of the other person's spirit, and it's so hard to watch somebody kill somebody because even if they don't physically kill them, they kill them spiritually, right? And that's what happened in my case. I was just killed spiritually and by my mom, and it was horrible. I really felt like I was dead, and that's what partners do to their other partners as well. And we see this in domestic violence situations. So even if there isn't a whole lot of physical abuse going on, the abuse, the emotional, psychological damage really will kill someone, you know what I mean? Inside, it will kill their spirits, and it's so hard to recover from that, you know what I mean? It's very hard for people to regain that sense of who they are and that they do count, they do matter. That's why on my shows I'm always telling people, you do count and you do matter. We all deserve to have a good life, and there's no one deserves to be treated badly like that, and it doesn't matter whether you're an adult or a child. No one deserves to be abused, right? And so that's why I just keep saying it, because so many people don't realize that. They feel so worthless. I know because I was there, and then I started to realize, hey, I do count. I do matter. I'm not worthless. I can offer something in this world, and I do have something to offer people, and I'm not just this useless, worthless, no good, whatever my mom really drilled into my head, and even my dad, right? And I thought, if you're a person in a domestic violence situation and your other partner has been treating you that way and telling you, oh, you're just worthless and you're this and you're that and you're no good and whatnot, don't believe those lies, because really that's all it is lies. It's a way to control you, and it's a way for them to feel good, because if they can lash out and make you feel completely horrible, then they might derive some sort of pleasure from that. I used to feel that my mom was like that. It would make her feel better if she got to do what she did to me. And because it would allow her to let some of that stuff out, but in the meantime she just did not care what it was doing to me, and she couldn't even see what it was doing to me because she was manic depressive. She was abused as a child herself. She had so many problems, so many emotional problems, and she was in this horrible marriage with a man that had no love for her, not 1 ounce. And I never heard my parents say they loved each other, not once. I saw them beating on each other quite a bit. Throwing lamps and throwing dishes at each other, hot coffee on each other, pushing each other around, smacking each other around. My mother was she was abusive towards my dad, but she was really protecting herself. I'm so glad that she did. But the thing is he was the instigator, and he would come in the house and start instigating it. He would push her to the point where she would have to do that, right? He would push her to where she would think she was going to lose her mind. And I mean, we saw this on a daily basis. And then, of course, she would push me to the point where I thought I was going to lose my mind. And so the whole family was just grasping for to stay alive and to stay, sane. Really was the issue. And it was absolutely a horrible way to grow up. And my mother was not a small little woman. If she was, my dad probably would have done a whole lot more physical damage to her. He actually did a lot of physical damage to her, raping her and everything like that. And, I'm not going to lie and say that didn't happen. I witnessed it. I know it was going on. And for people in my family to not acknowledge it, it really hurts my feelings because there's 2 siblings left in the family that just don't care. You know what I mean? Even though my mother abused me the way that she did and was completely horrible towards me and some of the other siblings, she did not deserve to be treated that way, and I knew that in my heart, see? And when I got old, I never ever thought, oh, well, she deserves it. I never thought that because, no one deserves that. And I saw the pain behind her eyes. I guess I was able to see what was going on behind the scenes because, she would sit and cry in the kitchen and then she later, when I became an older teenager, she would tell me stuff like, your father's trying to rape me again, you know what I mean? And the thing is that she was so sick, she was so physically sick and she had so many children, 9 children that she had, 2 were stillborn, 7 made it, and she was just very sick from the time she was in her 20s because my grandmother had abused her horribly. And we don't know everything about the abuse, but I do know she was abused. And my grandmother actually abused so many children, her own and also a whole bunch of orphans that lived with my grandmother and my grandfather years ago, back in like the 1930s. My grandmother abused them as well, and they all took off and ran away. So this is documented. It's real. My grandmother was a horrible woman, and she treated my mom so bad. And so my mom, what did she do? She did the same exact thing to me. There was no love, she wouldn't pick me up, put me on her lap and love me or hug me or anything like that. I was made to stay away from her, and she would push me away and keep me, hold me back, you know what I mean? So because of the domestic violence, I think if my dad had been there, a better partner for her, and had been there and shown her some real love and care, and she would have got help that she needed, because she did need help. Before they were even married, she needed help, right? To help her with her issues of being abused so badly, right? And then she might have been able to love us all, you know what I mean, and take care of us and be nurturing and, that sort of thing, right? But because it was domestic violence in the home, my parents were not getting along at all. It caused the whole thing to go worse. But I could see the pain in her eyes, and I knew, nobody deserves to be treated like that. And so, you make sure that if you are in that situation, you get yourself some help, and do not suffer in silence. There's people out there who, like myself, who really care and just want to make a difference in this world. And, there's hotlines out there you can phone to, talk to people who have been there. Most of those people manning those hotlines have been through and seen some sort of abuse. They either know about it firsthand, or they've suffered through it themselves, or they've been a victim of it secondhand, or someone in their family has died because of it. Generally, these people want people to be really well. They want people to have good lives, and they want people to get help, right? So sometimes just phoning just an anonymous person and just talking to them, really helps, because you need to know that you're not suffering in this alone, you know what I mean? And that there is people out there that can help, right? And you want to check out the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence website for a safety plan. And there's children's safety plans on this, the Alabama Coalition Against Domestic Violence. That's the ACADV.org. And there's children's safety plans for, just in case you have to get out and the partner starts to threaten your lives, right? So important that you do get help. And if there's abuse going on in the home, you really have to get, towards your children or your child, you have to get them help. It's against the law not to, but it should be really in your heart to protect your children. And so you wouldn't want them to be abused. And so that should be what comes first. And because it's a law, you have to get help for them. And you have to get help for yourself, too, because you don't deserve to be treated that way. And thanks so much for tuning in. We got about a minute left. I'm the Canada Regional Director for Dreamcatchers for Abused Children. So happy to be, let me tell you. You got to check our website out at http://dreamcatchersforabusedchildren.com. We are everywhere. We're on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, you name it. We are on MySpace, all over MySpace. So many volunteers and awesome people working with us, working to help stop child abuse by promoting awareness, prevention, and just getting some education out to people. Check our website out, and we also have on Blog Talk Radio, we have a Monday through Friday, a show every night from Dreamcatchers Talk Radio. That's at www.blogtalkradio.com/Dreamcatchers, just like it sounds, DREAMCATCHERS, Dreamcatchers. So I hope you can tune in Monday through Friday. There's some awesome hosts on there. There's going to be some great shows. Make sure you have a great weekend. Keep yourself safe. Take care. And until tomorrow morning, you're in my heart, and I just love you all so much. And have a nice day. Thanks. Bye-bye.